Fine.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Pactum's product showcase. It's a pleasure to see all of you here today. My name is Rao, and I'm the head of product at Pactum. We also have Calliope here.
Thank you, Rao. My name is Calliope. I'm a senior product manager at Pactum. I'm very happy to join the webinar to talk to you more about Pactum and the product. Thank you.
So it's great to have all of you here. At Pactum, our vision is to help transform how global businesses operate by using autonomous negotiations. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. We are really focused on negotiations at Pactum because we believe it's one of the most important parts of the overall value chain of businesses. And it's the place where a lot of value is created for both sides. And our mission is really to help companies realize this value at scale and the best ways possible. So we will spend the next 30 minutes or a little bit less here or so walking you through some of the highlights of how our product works and what are the kind of pieces that it's made up of, and how you can use it to deliver more bottom line value to your organization. We will do a bit of a product demo, and then if you have any questions, feel free to note them down in the Q&A section as well, and then we'll take the last minutes to address some of the questions that you might have as well. Before we dive into the product demo, let's briefly go over how the Pactum platform works and what are the kind of different pieces that make the magic autonomous negotiations happen. So you have a better overview of that as well. So let's go piece by piece. What is it that makes up Pactum and autonomous negotiations? The core part is, of course, the autonomous negotiations itself, using software to conduct business negotiations and to reach business deals and business conclusions. This is the central thing of what we do. There are two main user interfaces around that we've built. One is the supplier portal, which is the supplier-facing UI, which is then the chat where the chatbot actually conducts their negotiations. The other is the negotiation suite, which is our customer interface. So this is the platform through which you can launch, manage, and review your negotiations, look at statistics, and manage everything that you're doing with Pactum. And we're going to show you both of these pieces from both of these as we go through the demo as well. Now, in addition to these kind of big pieces, there are some pieces working in the background making autonomous negotiations happen. We have our own tool that's called the Negotiation Designer that we purpose-built to design and create and improve negotiations that we've built that can be used autonomously through software. And then we have our operational workspace, which is our operations and support platform that then supports all the thousands of negotiations that are happening at any given time. When we go into the negotiations itself, then we've kind of taking a very component-driven approach and a very kind of platform-driven approach of doing various different types of negotiations, because in business, you always have different types of negotiations. You're not always approaching them from the same perspective. On a high level, we have different product modules that then are aimed at different types of business context and different verticals or situations where you conduct negotiations. And then those are made up of different use cases that are part of our use case catalog. And we're going to go into this in a bit more detail in the next slide as well. On a lower level, we have what we call flow components or negotiation components. These are the components that make up of how we kind of build negotiations from the smaller building blocks and how can we make them work in different contexts and different situations. For example, we have a component for asking input from the supplier negotiation, and then we can use this component in different business contexts and use cases and kind of continuously develop it. The next layer that we go into is the AI engine. So maybe one of the most important pieces of the software. Value function is a very core piece of how we operate and what we do. And the value function is the mathematical formula of how do we do trade-offs between different business terms in a negotiation. So for example, thinking about what is the value of certain payment terms, or what is the value of warranties, what is the value of the price of the items or services that you're buying, and how can we trade that value between these different terms. And one of the central things that we can do, and that allows us to independently conduct business negotiations without humans being in the loop, kind of agreeing on some business conclusions with the other side, is that we know exactly how to do these trade-offs, and we always know 100% that we're doing a good deal for our customers. Also, we have a lot of machine learning models in different places in the tech stack that help us improve continuously and analyze what are the results that we do and how to be even more impactful and more precise in how we conduct negotiations. Next layer, there's quite a bit of them. Automation. So doing autonomous negotiations themselves is, I would argue, not enough. You have to also facilitate the automation of the entire process. So things that happen before and that happen after. So if you think about it, then our process starts from reaching out to the supplier, or let's say the negotiation preparation, and then reaching out to the supplier. And then we go step by step. So automatically reaching out, giving them the right context for the negotiation, then coming to our portal and doing the actual negotiation, and then transitioning to closing the agreement, so maybe signing the contract and so on. So we have different pieces that facilitate autonomously going step by step through the entire process. And then the last layer is the infrastructure layer. So our own data warehouse, where we collect our knowledge of how to do good negotiations and how to do better negotiations. We are SOC 2 certified, so security is very highly important to us. And then various integrations with different procurement platforms, for example, Ariba, Coupa, also DocuSign. It is important to note that Pactum augments your tech stack. We are not here to replace it. So we really want to do autonomous negotiations as part of your procurement processes. And we do integrations to seamlessly fit into those processes so that you can utilize Pactum at scale with as little disruption as possible. So this is the Pactum platform. These are all the small pieces that are needed to make autonomous negotiations a reality. And this is the thing that we've been building out over the last 3-4 years, piece by piece, and getting better and better. Now, the next question is, what do you do with all of these things? Like, what do you actually negotiate? And for that, we have our use case catalog. So on the bottom row, you can see our product modules, the 5 of them that we have today. And then on the top row, you can see the use cases that we support within those product modules. The products are meant for different types of business contexts. On the left-hand side, you have our 3 products that are more horizontal and more generally apply to different kinds of procurement processes. So we have our commercial terms product, which is meant for supplier level agreements. So you have general proactive reach outs of general terms of how you do business together without explicitly negotiating like a specific contract or purchase that you're doing. This, for example, includes the working capital use case, which is about optimizing your payment terms and how do you kind of get paid, or suppliers get paid. Second product is the contract cost product, which, as the name suggests, is about contracts and negotiating contracts. So here you have different types of contract templates you might be using. We're going to go into this as well. You might have new contracts, renewal of contracts, competitive bids that you want to convert into contracts. So doing these types of negotiations. And the third one is then purchasing, which is the tactical transactional negotiations. You want to buy something, whether it's just spot buying or more competitive tactical sourcing, but kind of these one-off activities. And then we also have some things that we do in some specific niche verticals like retail or logistics, where we know that the business context and the way of doing business is a little bit different and requires a little bit more dedicated approaches and more niche approaches. So we built in these verticals more specifically as well, doing autonomous negotiations in these different use cases. The 3 horizontal products that I talked about are definitely our most popular, most standard, and kind of most used. And these are the 3 that we're going to be focusing a little bit on today as well and kind of talking about. So enough of the general stuff. Let's jump into then what's actually in the product. And we're going to briefly go through the journey of different bits and pieces and kind of how that end-to-end process comes together. So let's say you log into Pactum. This is the negotiation suite. And you first log in, and this is where you start. This is the organizational level dashboard. So this is the widest level dashboard that aggregates together everything that you're doing with Pactum in your organization. across geographies, across languages, across products and use cases. It aggregates all that data together, and you can see how is your organization utilizing Pactum and what value is it creating. So you have a high-level KPIs here around like how much spend have you successfully negotiated, what has been the value generated, how many negotiations have you had, and then you have different graphs and dashboards below where you can dive deeper into details and kind of understand how your organization is doing with Pactum. You can also filter here by product or currency and so on. So this is the high-level kind of start. And from here, you can go into more details. Now, you might be asking, okay, this is the high level of stuff, but how do I get started? Like, how do I actually do autonomous negotiations? And for that, I'm going to hand it over to Calliope to talk a little bit more in detail about that.
Thank you, Raul. I'm going to quickly share my screen. Excellent. So I'm going to pick up from where Raul left off. How does one get started inside the Pactum platform? Well, it's really simple, really. What the buyer needs to do is give us the data for creating the negotiations. There are many ways to create them. One of them is with our upload template. It's a very easy template that you can download from a product. And once you download it as a buyer, you just need to insert some details. I'll show you an example of the template from the working capital product, except for the simple details around the supplier and their contact information. The other data points that we need is to understand the kind of deal that you have at the moment with a supplier for the specific negotiation. So the spend from the previous term, any payment terms that you have at the moment, payment discount days, payment discount percentage, current payment terms for net days, etc. So that will help us create the negotiation and also help us calculate the value for the negotiation later on. Another way to create a negotiation is to also use the UI from the product, from the suite. So it's very easy. There is an action to create a new negotiation. You have a form that you will fill in. I will show you an already filled in form so that it's a little bit more interesting to the eye. Again, except for the information around the negotiation, description, buyer and supplier, the important fields here, and this is from the contract cost product, is to fill in the details around the agreement that you want to have with the supplier. So a breakdown of the items that are part of the agreement, also the intention as a buyer of what you want to do with this negotiation. Do you need a decrease? Do you even need an increase? Incentives that you might want to share with the supplier to persuade them to agree better terms with you. This is the contract cost product, so a contractual term is relevant, so you can set the start date for that term. You can also set the duration. You can even set alternative terms, which we can use for trade-offs and help us get a better agreement from the supplier. And again, payment days, as we saw for the other product. So that's another interesting way. Now that we've seen that, I'd like to spend a little bit more time to look at the contract cost product. So Ryan introduced the use cases earlier. One of them is contract cost. I will choose it here from our use case catalog. And my experience as a buyer starts from the list view. Here is really a dashboard where I can see a list of all my negotiations. I can see important things about them and an overview about where they are in the progress. I can also sort them, see what's agreed. For the things that have been agreed, I can also see savings, which is very important and interesting. I can also see deadlines for things that are due. And so within the space of a screen, I have a really quick understanding of what's happened with my negotiations. I want to move on now. I spent a little bit more time earlier showing you how to create negotiations, so I won't do that again, but I do want to show you another way of importing data. So contract cost, for instance, can also be integrated with Coupa. So in that scenario, it's very easy for the buyer to actually import details from the requisitions that they already have in Coupa. It's a very simple journey whereby you just give us the requisition ID, you click on import. What happens is that we get the data, and in similar fashion as before, I can still edit the negotiation. And you can see that the fields that are relevant to understanding your intention as a buyer with this negotiation, etc., are still available for you to configure, things we didn't know from Coupa. So that's another way of importing the data. Another interesting feature of contract cost before I leave this product is the ability to support different agreement templates. So if part of the negotiation process is to also execute an actual contractual paper with a supplier, then we can support that. And as a buyer, you have the ability for each negotiation to choose the route and the template that goes with that route. So here is an example of an order form, which could be for a new contract and a renewal. And dynamically, the form updates to give you the appropriate fields so that both the templates are populated and the appropriate documents are generated. And so the buyer has been enabled to choose the appropriate route for the negotiation. Now, I guess we've created the negotiations. So what happens next? I'm going to hand over to Rao, who's going to tell us more about the negotiations and the techniques applied in them.
Thank you, Calliope. So I will quickly show you a few things about how we then do negotiations. So as we went through, Calliope showed you how can you get started, what's the kind of data that you need to do negotiations, and what are the various ways you can give input to Pactum. Now we will talk a little bit about what happens during the negotiations. So you push your start button, and then the negotiation is sent out. The supplier gets an email, they get a link, and they can log into the portal and start doing the negotiations. This is the chat portal that you can see on the screen. And you have some basic information here on the left and right hand side, so giving you the context. And then you also have the chat in the middle. And as you're looking at the chat, there are various things that we do. So we are a negotiations company. We put a lot of time and effort into talking about understanding how to do better and better negotiations and how to improve the value that we create for both sides. So we try to utilize a lot of negotiation science and good negotiation practices. For example, we use multiple mesos or multiple offers that are equal in value. On your screen, you can see we are making an offer of like 2 options to the supplier, option A, option B. There's different trade-offs and different terms here between price of items, payment days, agreement length. So it's a more simpler example. You could also do 3, 4, 5 different offers. You could do offers across more terms. And the important bit here is that from a customer perspective, these have equal value, right? You would equally accept both of these deals, but we give those choices to the supplier because individual suppliers will have individual things that they want to do or that they find important. Some want to get paid earlier, others value more having a longer contract, for example. So giving these individual choices helps us to be better at adapting each negotiation and each deal to the individual supplier needs while still creating value for both the customer and the supplier. We also use some other, let's say, advanced negotiation techniques. One of the things that we do often is we try to understand supplier preferences. So what is it that the supplier is interested in and what is it that they value the most? So we have a component that asks different types of questions from them, like what do you value or don't value? Do you agree with this statement or you disagree with the statement? And based on then the input that the supplier gives, we can take that input in and we can understand like, okay, for this supplier, it's important to get paid quickly. So we should, emphasize doing shorter payment terms, but we can trade it off with some other value, for example. So this really allows us to more frequently get to better deals that both sides value and both sides find good and important. And I think the core part here really is with these negotiations that I think Pactum is in a really unique situation. We arguably have the world's largest database of structured negotiation data. The more negotiations we do, the more data we have around what's important, what works, what doesn't work, how to do better negotiations, how to reach better deals. And this is the kind of learnings that we can systematically use, we can implement and use them at scale. So every new negotiation makes use of these learnings as we get them. There are some simple examples of what these learnings might be is, for example, that we know that on certain days of the week, it is more likely that we reach a good deal with both parties than on other days of the week. So we know that we should be negotiating certain days of the week more than others, for example. Very simple example, but it gets quite a bit more complicated as well. But we can accumulate these learnings and use them to make the value that we offer bigger and bigger over time as we do more things. So that's the negotiation part. Let's say as a supplier, you go through the chat portal, you finish your negotiations, you reach an agreement. This part is done. what follows next. And for that, I'm going to hand it back to Calliope.
Thank you, Ram. So it is possible at the end of the negotiation, as I mentioned earlier, that you might also need to sign an agreement. So I want to finish off that negotiation process where the agreement execution is relevant. As part of the chat, the supplier will be asked if they are the appropriate contact or who is for signing the generated agreement. And then DocuSign will take over and will send a link to them, to the supplier and also to the buyer for signature. In the meantime, the buyer can come back to the product, the suite, and they can access the negotiation where agreement has been reached. For instance, just to show you where I've come from here, I'm on the list view, and I'm looking at my agreed negotiations. If I click on one, I can see basically a breakdown, which is very interesting for the buyer. Most importantly, because I came from DocuSign, I can also access the DocuSign template that has been signed. So as a buyer, I can see the executed document from here. In terms of the breakdown, which is a very nice drill down into what happened in the negotiation that Ra was just talking us through, this is really where all the data that we were collecting has become meaningful. Not only can we report on the before, but also we can do comparisons and we can report now on the after. You can see important amounts and percentages around savings, but you also have a record around the various terms that were part of the value calculation for the negotiation, including anything else that was agreed during the negotiation. For instance, the incentives that were offered to the supplier and that they have actually agreed to. So that's a nice breakdown of that. Finally, I want to close off. As a buyer, I have another opportunity to see how things are going for me in Pactum. I can look at my dashboard. Now, if you remember, Rao showed us the org level dashboard. So that would be at enterprise level where a company will have many of these workspaces. But if as a buyer or a manager or a business lead, I want to look at what's happening with a specific workspace, I also have this one level down bird's eye view here. Again, similarly to the org level dashboard, I have insights that are relevant to my negotiations, from savings, spend, conversion, statuses. Everything can give me minute on minute what's happening within this space, and I can apply different lenses. So with that note, I want to now hand over to Rao, who has another exciting feature to show us and to close off the presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Calliope, and thanks for the great demo. So yes, as we're going to wrap up the demo in a few minutes and then move on to the Q&A, I kind of wanted to come full circle and show you what kind of on a more maybe abstract level, what this product can do for you. And as the last point, touch on bringing out the scale of impact that Pactum can have on your organization. So we're doing autonomous negotiations, which means we can do negotiations at scale. We can do a lot of negotiations. We can do them in parallel, and we can really manage those things at a level of scale that software brings you. You can also see the impact that this can have in our product. So for example, here on the screen, you have an example of our working capital use case. And you see the savings column here. And for the negotiations that have concluded, you see the kind of value improvement that you've gotten from this negotiation. But for the negotiations that you haven't started yet, for example, we can also predict to you based on our historic experience and based on your experience specifically with Pactum, if you've been using us previously, predict to you like what kind of impact can you expect from this negotiation and also these negotiations together. So if you give us your data, we can really kind of start showing you and start communicating to you what kind of impact you could have if you're doing autonomous negotiations at scale. And with that, I will finish on this thought. I hope we managed to give you a good, if brief, overview of how Pactum works. We kind of went through a few different things and showed you a few different snapshots of how our product works and what does it do. We could spend hours here talking about everything, but we did a short webinar to kind of give you the highlights. So now we will move on to answering any questions that you might have, and I will hand it over to Fabian. We'll manage our Q&A.
Thank you. Yeah, we did receive a couple of questions, and I would just take them by order. So the first one we received was around savings. You mentioned that 1 or 2 times, and the question is, how are the savings calculated? And building on that, can we actually influence that savings calculation?
Yes, I'll take that one. So the savings are really calculated based on the value function. Let's come back to that. That's really a central part of our product and what makes our product maybe special a little bit. So when we start with a new client, one part of the setup is kind of going through defining the boundaries of the value function. So if you're negotiating price, then it's pretty easy, right? You're kind of talking about savings in price. But then if you go to other terms, we go through the process together with the client to define what are these terms worth for you. For payment terms, we'll talk about capital efficiency and what's your kind of back percentages, and kind of go into like, okay, like changing payment terms from this to this, what's that value for you? Same for like contract duration, warranties, and stuff like that. So we map it out together with the customer, and that value function can be influenced on individual negotiation level as well, in the input as Calliope was showing. But overall, it's that value function that then determines how we calculate savings, how we think about the deals that we do, and so on.
And that's actually perfect, because I had another question around the value formula and how people decide on how to assign a value to some of those things. Can you explain how you help customers actually get to that point? Because I think it's a little bit difficult to imagine.
Yeah, exactly. It is maybe a new way of kind of thinking about things that people don't often do for everything. At least, you think about those terms for some business terms, but not for everything. And I think for us, it's really come through the experience of how to kind of open it up, the process to the customers to very efficiently do this, right? Because this is not a long process. It's maybe sitting down together like 1 or 2 times, going through a short workshop and kind of discussing through how to do things. And I think we've kind of developed our own methodology of how to do it to make it very, very easy for our customers, because we've done it dozens of times and we've kind of learned what works, what doesn't, and we made it quite efficient in that sense.
So you're basically hand-holding the client.
Asking the right questions. I'd say like that.
That's what I wanted to hear. Another question that came in was around Ariba and Coupa integrations, and if you can tell us a little bit more about how that works, what that actually does. So I think that would be quite interesting, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of people have Coupa or Ariba in place already.
Yes, I can do that as well. So yeah, we do integrate with Ariba and Coupa, and it kind of, how it works depends a little bit on the product as well, because they come in different contexts. So I'll talk about a few specific examples. Overall, it can work on kind of 2 levels. Let's say a fully automatic version or a semi-automatic version. So in the purchasing product, for example, which is about one-off purchases, we can make it work really as a fully automatic process where we become a part of the approval flow. So we're kind of a piece in the approval flow of when you're doing a purchase or have a requisition out. At some point of time, it's going to come to Pactum. We're going to automatically pull the data in. We're going to go out, reach out to the supplier, negotiate the terms, whether it's single source or competitive, depending on the situation. We're going to do all the negotiations. We're going to get all the results. We're going to package it together, send it back to either Ariba or Coupa, and then it's going to go to the next step in the approval flow, and all the kind of information of the negotiation results is there. And then you can, of course, log back into the suite as well and kind of see in Pactum systems those same results. So that's one option. The other option is to do it kind of in a hybrid way, which is what Calliope was showing in the demo as well, where you kind of import data in. You maybe want to individually adjust some things. You want to add some negotiation targets. You want to do some work on it. So you kind of want to handle it a little bit before you send it out. So you do that, but after that, the process is the same, right? So we reach out, we do the negotiations, we get results back, we push the results back into the system that we integrated in. So
that's basically a description of intercepting all of those purchase orders that nobody in procurement has ever touched and wouldn't even see very often, because
either those or the ones that you want to give us that you are touching maybe today but don't want to continue touching it. So it depends really on the company and the processes and how we kind of touch it. Yeah.
All right, cool. Are there any geographical limitations or language limitations? I remember in our last webinar we already heard a little bit about that as well from Martin, but like, what's the experience with different languages?
We do a variety of languages. I think today we're doing maybe 6 languages, 7, 8, something in that ballpark. So there's a certain set of standard languages that we support today that are kind of, English, Japanese, Korean, German, Spanish, something like that. If it's a language that we haven't done before, then it's kind of, we need to discuss it and think about how do we do it. But if it's kind of part of our standard kind of package, then it's easy. Our products or multiple languages for the supplier negotiations.
And there was one question around what do the suppliers say that have negotiated through Pactum, and maybe even based on different locations, if there's different experiences.
It's a good question. I think one of the things that people don't expect, and because that's always the first question you get, what are going to suppliers think about this, right? Like, I can't use this. I think it's actually has a positive effect. Like our supplier ratings are actually quite high when we get feedback scores or around this process as well. And I think a lot of it has to do with the control and efficiency. So first, efficiency. You have control over the negotiation process. You just log in. You can go through things. It's structured in a very structured way. Especially if you're doing more complicated negotiations with all business terms, it's very structured. It's easier to navigate through. This is then going back and forth between emails, calls, and Excel sheets. And then the other thing is also you have more control as a supplier because we send you the link. Maybe there's a deadline of 1 week, but it's up to you. When do you come in? When do you want to take a pause for 2 hours to think about the question that was asked? Like, how do I want to solve this in business-wise? You can do it. So they get a lot of control from that.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we're out of time already, and there's quite a few more questions that I could ask you. Just based on what you just said, one that we can maybe answer is multivariable negotiations. Just one sentence. Is it possible? And is it something that you have experience with?
Sorry, I was muted. So when you say multivariable, what do you mean by that exactly?
We said people are asking just, can you basically pick all of the different commercial elements of a contract, or is it always just one, basically like price?
Oh yeah, okay, in that sense, okay. Yes, we do. I mean, we can pick, and that's one of our strengths. I think that we can trade off different terms inside the same context in negotiation. So it's not just price; it's going to be price, warranties, Incoterms, payment terms, contract durations, minimum order quantities. It's going to be a complex kind of set, and yeah, we can do multivariable in that sense. Yes.
Yeah. And I think just based on the experience that I have with you guys, it's more that's not usually where you start when you work with Pactum. You would probably start a little bit with something simpler of what you described earlier, and that's more than elevating and learning to get to that point, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So let's close it here. Thank you very much. I think like what we will do is I will go through all of the questions and just we will respond to you individually. If you leave us in the survey that follows when you leave the Zoom call, if you leave your contact address, then we will just respond to you individually. Perfect.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.